May 10th, 1869. Promontory Summit, Utah. The ceremonial golden spike is driven into the earth, officially connecting the two halves of the first transcontinental railroad. Official history celebrates this as the ultimate, undeniable victory of 19th century progress. 1,912 miles of heavy iron track, laid across lethal mountain ranges, barren deserts, and untamed wilderness. And we are instructed to believe that this was accomplished in just 6 years. We have been conditioned to accept this logistical miracle without question. We are told that in an era when the primary mode of transport was a horse and communication relied on a primitive telegraph, a workforce of unskilled laborers achieved an infrastructural density that modern diesel-powered engineering firms would struggle to replicate today. They allegedly built it entirely by hand, with iron picks, wooden shovels, and raw human grit. But today, we are not reading the romance of the history books. We are opening the ledger. We are performing a strict, unforgiving technical audit of the metallurgy, the tonnage, the geodetic surveying, and the biological limits of the workforce. And when the mathematics violently contradict the historical narrative, we must ask the only logical question remaining. What if they didn't build this network? What if they were excavating it?
Welcome to Titanmetrics. Let us audit the rails. To comprehend the sheer absurdity of the official timeline, we must first audit the basic materials required for the project of the century. Let us isolate the mathematics to just one single kilometer of 19th century railroad track. To lay 1 kilometer, you require roughly 120 tons of forged iron rails, at least 1,500 heavy wooden sleepers, also known as ties, approximately 3,000 kilograms of iron spikes and connecting bolts, and thousands of tons of ballast, the crushed stone and sand absolutely necessary to stabilize the embankment. Now, multiply those metrics by 3,000 kilometers to account for the transcontinental line. We are looking at an extraction, manufacturing, and delivery requirement of over 360,000 tons of forged iron. This brings us to the first insurmountable logistical bottleneck, the origin of the iron. In the 1860s, the United States steel and iron industry was still in its relative infancy. The only mills capable of producing this volume of heavy rail were located on the East Coast. To deliver these rails to the active construction sites in the deep deserts of Nevada or the mountains of Utah, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific companies had exactly 2 options. Option 1. Haul hundreds of thousands of tons of iron across the uncharted, roadless continent using horse-drawn wagons. Mathematically and biologically, this is an absurd impossibility. Option 2, which is the official historical narrative, ship the iron on wooden cargo vessels all the way around the treacherous southern tip of South America up to San Francisco. A highly dangerous, unpredictable maritime voyage lasting a minimum of 6 months. But the maritime journey does not solve the final mile. Audit the topography. There are no deep water ports in the Nevada desert. There are no paved highways leading into the vertical granite faces of the Sierra Nevada mountains. How do you transport tens of thousands of tons of iron rails to the foot of a mountain range when you have not yet built a road through that mountain range? It is a catastrophic logistical paradox. To bring in the heavy materials required to build the railroad, you inherently need a functional railroad. The ledger expects us to believe that 20-foot-long iron rails, each weighing over 500 pounds, were loaded on fragile, unsprung horse carts and dragged through deep mud and over vertical mountain passes. And then, this excruciating process was repeated millions of times, flawlessly, without halting the 6-year construction timeline.
If the macro-logistics are impossible, the micro-logistics are outright fabricated. The most fantastical entry in the official ledger is the world record allegedly set on April 28, 1869. It is officially claimed and taught in universities that the workers of the Central Pacific Railroad laid exactly 10 miles, 16 kilometers, of track in a single 12-hour daylight shift. Let us perform a forensic audit of this specific record. 10 miles of track equates to 25,800 heavy wooden sleepers. It equates to 3,520 iron rails. It equates to 28,160 iron spikes, which must be driven perfectly into hard wood by hand. The official historical account specifically states that the primary lifting and placing of the iron rails was executed by a core team of just 8 men. Only 8 men lifted every single rail and placed it precisely onto the wooden ties. The weight of a standard rail at that time was approximately 550 pounds, or 250 kilograms. Let us do the math. 3,520 rails multiplied by 550 pounds. That is 880 tons of solid iron. Divide 880 tons by 8 men. The official narrative dictates that every single worker on that team, operating in a grueling 12-hour shift, physically lifted and maneuvered 110 tons of iron. This is biologically and physically impossible. The biomechanical limit of the human skeletal and muscular system does not allow for this transfer of mass at this velocity. Furthermore, a rail is not simply dropped onto the dirt. It must be perfectly aligned, gauged, and secured. Each rail requires a minimum of 8 heavy iron spikes. To drive a single spike into a dense hardwood tie, a worker requires 3 to 4 precise maximum force strikes with a heavy sledgehammer. To secure 10 miles of track in 12 hours requires hundreds of thousands of perfectly aimed sledgehammer strikes, a continuous, deafening rhythm that cannot pause for a single minute. If you accept this historical record, you must believe these men were indestructible biological machines. Or the operation was something else entirely. If the heavy iron rails were already there, buried under layers of accumulated sediment, mud, and debris, and the record was actually documenting the clearing of the dirt and the rapid replacement of rotted wooden components, then the mathematics finally begin to align. Clearing a pre-existing geodetically aligned track is exponentially faster than surveying, grading, and building a new one from raw earth.
But the rails themselves are only part of the matrix. We must audit the supporting infrastructure. Look at the archival photographs of the grand neoclassical train stations built in the absolute middle of nowhere in Nevada, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. In a desolate location where mere months prior there was nothing but sagebrush and coyotes, a colossal stone station suddenly appears. Built in the imperial style, featuring massive stone columns, ornate cornices, high vaulted ceilings, and highly advanced electrical and plumbing systems. Where did the millions of bricks come from? Where was the granite quarried? Where are the massive industrial brick kilns required to fire this material in the desert? The textbooks provide the standard lazy answer: everything was brought in by train. But this violates the timeline. You cannot use the train to bring in the millions of tons of stone required to build the station, if the station must be built to service the train. Are we to believe they hauled hundreds of tons of purely decorative, non-functional carved stone on horse-drawn carts through the lethal deserts just to build a palatial transit hub for a town with a population of 50 people? Look closely at the viaducts and the bridges. Consider the Dale Creek Bridge in Wyoming. a delicate, hyper-complex lattice iron structure allegedly erected in 1868, spanning a massive gorge in a location where it was physically impossible to deliver a heavy lifting crane. We are told it was assembled on site by men with hand tools. Modern structural engineers know the truth. Structures of this specific lattice complexity require factory-grade, temperature-controlled assembly, high-precision pneumatic riveting, and deep, massive concrete and stone foundations to prevent fatal harmonic swaying. And the most revealing anomaly lies in those very foundations. Why do the stone foundations of these remote bridges and stations frequently extend 30 or 40 feet deep into the earth, inexplicably hiding beautifully carved archways and windows beneath the soil line? We are looking at the exact same physical pattern we audited in the buried buildings of Chicago, Paris, and Moscow. The 19th century railroad infrastructure is not new. It is deeply integrated into the same global cataclysm that buried the lower levels of the Old World cities.
To further prove this, we must audit the geometry of the Earth itself. Building a functional railroad is, first and foremost, a grueling exercise in advanced geodesy. A steam locomotive is an incredibly heavy, friction-dependent machine. To keep a train from losing traction on an incline or violently derailing on a curve, the absolute grade of the track cannot exceed 2%. To achieve a maximum 2% grade across a continent, you must perfectly level thousands of miles of chaotic, unpredictable landscape. You must slice through solid granite hills. You must fill in deep, unstable valleys with millions of tons of compacted ballast. In the 1860s, the surveyors did not possess laser leveling. They did not have satellite topographical maps. They did not have GPS. They relied entirely on primitive optical theodolites and plumb bobs. Yet, the transcontinental line traverses the lethal vertical granite faces of the Sierra Nevada mountains with a mathematical precision that looks as if it were calculated by a modern supercomputer. How did men on foot, fighting blizzards and hostile terrain, chart a flawless 2% grade path through hundreds of miles of impassable, unmapped forests without aerial reconnaissance? The official academic version is romantic. Genius engineers walked the path. The technical, logistical reality is entirely different. They utilized pre-existing embankments. All over the world, archaeologists find massive, unexplained, ancient roads or earthen ramparts. In Russia, they are called the Serpent's Walls. In Europe, they are falsely attributed to the Romans. These are massive, geodetically perfect earthen embankments that have stood for millennia, defying erosion. The ruthless railroad tycoons of the 19th century did not design these routes. They simply found these ready-made, mathematically perfect highways of the past. They cleared the overgrowth, excavated the mud, and laid their iron on top of the ancient grid.
Why hide the fact that they found a ready-made global transport network? The answer is the oldest motive in human history: financial monopoly and absolute power. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act. Under this sweeping legislation, the United States government provided private railroad companies with massive, taxpayer-funded loans. But more importantly, the government granted them free, unrestricted ownership of the land on both sides of the tracks they supposedly built. For every single mile of constructed road, these private corporations received between $16,000 and $48,000 and millions of acres of prime, resource-rich real estate. If you approach the government and state, "We found an ancient buried road, and we simply cleaned it off," you do not receive a single cent of federal funding. You do not get the land. But if you control the press, and you claim we performed a miraculous, impossible feat of engineering and built this from scratch in unbearable conditions, you instantly become the richest entity on the planet. This is exactly how the staggering, unprecedented fortunes of the Rockefellers, the Stanfords, and the Vanderbilts were born. They were not visionary builders. They were the asset strippers of the old world. They aggressively privatized a global, highly advanced transport network that belonged to a unified civilization that existed prior to the Great Reset. This is the true meaning of the Golden Spike. It was not merely a celebration of connecting two iron rails. It was a formal, elite ceremony to legally seal the ownership of a stolen past.
Today, when we ride a modern train, we look out the window and see endless, perfectly graded embankments. We see massive tunnels smoothly carved through solid granite, and iron bridges that have stood for over a century without fundamental repair. We are told by the bronze plaques and the history books that these are monuments to the hard work of our 19th century ancestors, armed with nothing but shovels and dynamite. But a forensic technical audit proves otherwise. The supply chain logistics do not match. The biology of the workforce cannot support the tonnage. The metallurgy of the tools contradicts the hardness of the stone. And the geodetic surveying is a mathematical impossibility for the era. We are living on the sprawling, repurposed ruins of a world that was far more complex and technologically advanced than our own. The global railroad network was the circulatory system of that old world. The 19th century industrialists simply resuscitated the corpse, laid claim to the veins, and took all the credit. If they lied about who built the roads that connect our cities, what else are they hiding in the architecture? Subscribe to the channel. The ledger remains open.